Welcome to Capitol View, our weekly look inside and outside of the Illinois State Capitol. I'm Jeff Williams in this week for Jennifer Fuller. Our guests are Amanda Vinicki of WTTW in Chicago Tonight and Alex Degman, Illinois Public Radio and WBEZ. Welcome to both of you. Thank you for joining us this week.
Thanks for having me.
Yep, thank you so much.
All right, at the risk of sounding like a broken record, the legal challenges to the state's assault weapons ban continue to play out in the courts. I think one of the most recent updates has happened near the state capitol in Macon County, where I believe a circuit court judge has issued a temporary restraining order. Nothing really new that we've seen there. We've seen this in other counties in the state. Along with that, last couple of weeks or so, we've also seen the state successfully move some of those cases to a federal jurisdiction. We've also seen that the state and the Attorney General have looked to try and consolidate some of those cases. With all of that going on now in the background, we now have the lawmakers in town. We're getting into kind of the heart of the legislative session. With these legal challenges kind of hanging over lawmakers, is that going to have any impact on what they are able to do or what they want to do this legislative session?
I don't think that there's going to be much by way of legislation that's going to go through that's based on the assault weapons ban, because as you mentioned, it's going through the courts right now, and it's probably going to stay there for at least a little bit, because I don't think that Democrats really have an appetite to do anything that's going to alter what they've already done. And I don't think that anything that Republicans would like to do by way of, perhaps repealing it or putting something else on the books is going to get out of the Rules Committee at this point. And when you think about it, it really has dominated the conversation for much of the last year. The assault weapons ban was the big accomplishment that Democrats had in their lame duck session, and really for much of the calendar year 2022. It took a lot of time, and they were really proud of their accomplishments, and they're still standing by them despite all the court challenges. You hear Democrats coming out and saying frequently, we believe that this is constitutional. We believe that the higher court's going to rule in our favor, et cetera. So it's dominating the conversation, but as it continues to go through the courts, it's going to continue to cause a lot of stir, because Republicans specifically are going to want to highlight every challenge that comes across, because it, as I mentioned, was Democrats' big accomplishment. So every single time something comes up, when there's a new challenge, when there's a new ruling in their favor, they're going to want to talk about it. They're going to want to highlight it as kind of a, I told you so.
Yeah, I agree with Alex. I don't think there's going to be much action on that front legislatively, other than you will hear talk about it, probably actually from both sides. And then I will add that depending on, of course, what comes of this on the legal front, which could take quite some time, frankly, you might realize that this is not going to be the final end-all, be-all of the bill. As we often see in Springfield, there will be tweaks, there might be amendments to this actual law, but that won't be until we get some sort of final legal judgment on it.
Let me ask you both this. We have all these different challenges. They're at the county level and now some at the federal level, all across. Is there anything fundamentally different in each of these challenges, or is this just some good old-fashioned Illinois political posturing that I want my name on a challenge in my district?
There's a lot of that. There certainly is a lot of that. And also perhaps there is a benefit to particular, let's say, gun dealers who are part of some of these suits that have thus far been successful, because they have been exempt from complying with the law due to temporary restraining orders put in place by local judges. And so they can continue to sell guns and magazines that other gun shops, gun dealers are forbidden to do by that new law that took effect in early January. So that's one, I suppose, benefit of being part of it, but also comes, of course, with a cost. These individuals are contributing to paying an attorney. So there's some of that. Do not forget that attorneys might want to get in on this, because that's how they make their money. And yes, we have seen some posturing by local legislators, one in particular who, and this is kind of getting to a side fight, but one of the attorneys, Tom DeVore, who of course was unsuccessful, but was the Republican nominee for Attorney General, taking issue with a state legislator, Dan Calkins, who was part of this. So I do think that there is political posturing, but there's also some key differences in each of these bills. And those would include things like Some are really focused on the procedure of how this law was passed. Others are focused instead on the heart and soul of it and Second Amendment issues. Others are focused on related mechanisms such as that the AR-15, which is one of the now illegal quote unquote assault weapons listed in the law, is very common, and that per some recent rulings from the U.S. Supreme Court, including the Bruin decision, common guns should not be in not actually the Bruin decision. There's another prior to that, but that common guns are allowed, that you cannot restrict those. And so there's a whole lot of different legal arguments. I think it is the legal posturing. It's also trying to see what sticks. And then there are some big groups. Those are the ones that we're really focused on. While thus far, there's been more movement because they go quicker in the local courts. And again, there's been these temporary restraining orders that have had limited impact thus far. What we're really counting on and looking to is some of these federal cases and what happens as they go forward. And then further, what happens with some other legal cases from other states ahead of Illinois with similar laws regarding assault weapons restrictions that we could see the U.S. Supreme Court decide on first. And that, of course, would have an impact on what happens with this law and in Illinois otherwise.
Not directly related, but maybe tangentially, challenges remain to the Safety Act and to elimination of cash bail. I've heard that some lawmakers are also talking and looking at maybe making some additional changes or reforms to the criminal justice system in the state. Any idea yet at this point whether or not that's something that lawmakers are going to move forward with, or maybe they're going to shift into neutral and again see how this may or may not play out through the courts?
Well, I think if we look at how things have played out regarding the assault weapons ban or really anything else that has been challenged in courts, I think that the majority Democrats are going to push forward with their agenda and just be confident that what they pass is going to pass constitutional muster. I think that's going to be the case with any criminal justice reform legislation that we see coming up, or if there have to be revisions to anything that is being challenged in the courts. I think that Democrats, I mean, regardless of what's happening, they are a separate branch of government, and they believe that what they're going to do is going to be good. So I think that's what we're going to see a lot of.
Yeah, I mean, I think we are waiting to see what is forthcoming, of course, with the Safety Act. We've already seen a lot of the posturing. I feel like I continue to use that word because that is really what is coming up with some of these truly hot button issues among the enforcement by sheriffs. So some of this is going to be playing out not just in the courts, not just in the legislature, but in the eye of public opinion. And as we see how people begin to feel about this law, and of course, depending on some of these reactions. So I think that, yes, criminal justice continues to be at the forefront. There were those that were disappointed that the Safety Act didn't go further in particular areas. Those, of course, who believe that it went way too far. So we are going to continue to see issues like this percolate, but similar to the assault weapons law, when you have a monster piece of legislation and statute that is before the courts, pretty much you're going to have that left untouched because it is unwise and unpractical to go in and fiddle with it.
A big event kind of on the calendar. The governor, J.B. Pritzker, will be giving his annual State of the State budget address to a joint session of the General Assembly next week. I know we've touched a little bit on this program about what to expect budget-wise and out of Springfield next week. What are you anticipating to hear and see from the governor next week?
Well, I think that it's going to touch on a few themes because Governor J.B. Pritzker has, I think he's going to really hammer home the message that that the state of Illinois has come out the other side of the COVID pandemic a lot better off than it was even just a few years ago. So I'm pretty sure he's going to be talking about the things that they're doing and the things that is already made the state better off in their opinion. And I think he's also going to be heavy-handed on the budget. Just kind of look at these surpluses. Yes, a lot of that was from federal COVID relief money, and a lot of that was also, unfortunately, due to inflation, because that's where a lot of the increased tax revenue has come from increased when things cost more, we pay more in taxes. So those are things that are going to they're not going to be as prevalent in the budget as we go forward, especially toward 2024, 2025. But for now, things are looking pretty good, and he's going to be talking about that. And then he also, I think, I don't know if there's still the conversation that we were having seriously a couple of months ago about presidential aspirations, especially because of all of the news that we've seen recently about Joe Biden, the reaction to the State of the Union address and how he performed there. But he's still going to really put a focus on Illinois as just this bastion in the Midwest of these progressive ideals, these popular ideas in Illinois. And, Illinois is the place in the Midwest where this is all happening. So he is probably going to use this platform again to just reiterate that, this is who we are. This is what we're about. And look at the gains that we made in the legislature. Look for more things to come from the Democrats. I think that's going to be the main message that he tries to get across there.
Mm-hmm.
And we sort of all had a preview of that with his inauguration speech, where this is going to be, I think Alex is spot on. The specifics of what he wants Democrats to implement include something that he'd sort of mentioned a bit on the campaign trail, and that was making college free for low to middle income families, and then expanding childcare and making that available more. So, pre-K, I mean, these are things that he mentioned, got a lot of attention for in his inauguration address. This is the time where, again, it is a speech. It is not going to be full of details, but we reporters often get a little bit of a preview, or sometimes it comes after the fact, where we'll be able to have an opportunity to meet with the governor's office of management and budget. They'll lay out some of the mechanics of how that will take place and, the dollars and cents behind it, because of course, free for everybody generally sounds great, except for you have to have the money to back it up. And right now, revenue projections do have Illinois coming in with actually more than had been anticipated previously. But there's a lot of buts there. That's one-time revenue. How much of that do you count on? What good is a program if you implement it 1 year and then pull the rug out from underneath families? So I think there are going to be a lot of hard questions about these ideas that at this point are celebrated, applauded, particularly by Pritzker fans and Democrats, but that skeptics will say, hey, wait a second, can Illinois afford this, for how long and how? So those will be some of the additional things that he's going to be talking about.
Mm-hmm. I thought it was really interesting that you saw Comptroller Susana Mendoza come out just a few days ago warning lawmakers about just what you were talking about. These are one-time revenues. So, let's be careful about this. Let's be careful about enacting long-term programs that we're going to have to pay for long after these funds dry up.
Mm-hmm. That said, obviously, every year when the budget process comes around, everybody's looking at the budget book and everybody's wanting more for their agencies. Are you anticipating any increases anywhere in any of the big line items, like either higher education or K through 12 or other social service agencies where we typically, especially Democrats, typically like to put through and add into those budgets if the money is there to do that? Are you either of you anticipating to see any significant increases in any line items?
I'm not sure about significant per se, but you're going to have money that is allocated per the Safety Act. It is not actually allocated, but dedicated if money is found to go towards some of the implementation there, toward things such as there's going to be, for sure, pressure from local states' attorneys to give them additional funding to implement some of this. Money for public defenders, which is already included in part of the legislation. So there's that. You're going to have pressure as well to put more money toward Illinois' education formula, something that still has, you have millions more dollars annually that are necessary in order to get to the point where that formula, it does what it is meant to accomplish in terms of equitable funding toward Illinois schools. You still have the least funded, least well-off school districts needing a whole lot more from the state in order to get up to that level. So I think that there will be both pressure to see more than this is a very early prediction. I try not to really do those, but there's going to be a lot of groups that are saying, hey, we eye these revenues. We want that money. There's going to be a lot of causes that want it. Who comes out on top is difficult to guess. But at this early stage, I would say that it is a near certainty. You don't want to be the governor that is taking or decreasing funding, say, from K to 12 schools. You're going to see some sort of bump there. Formula and see that it is behind. No, I'm guessing that because you have all of these other ideas and platforms and those calling for other uses for that money, that's not going to be where all of it goes, for example.
Do you think that pensions may come up again? I know Crane's Chicago Business reports a new plan is being floated to increase some revenues there as a way to pay down the unfunded liability. If we got a little extra money in the coffers, hey, let's pay down the pension plan some, which always is a popular idea in Illinois. Might that be worked into what we see come out this year?
Yeah, there was 1 year that Governor Pritzker did propose sort of tinkering, let's say, with Illinois' pension payment and what was he was obligated to pay that year. That did not end up coming to fruition, and I think that's something that perhaps Pritzker looks back on as is an idea that he floated and is maybe thankful was not embraced, because now he can say going forward, whether he has higher ambitions beyond Illinois or otherwise, that he's always made that pension payment and kept up with the funding formula and done his job and been fiscally responsible. He would not have been able to say that, I don't think, had his original idea gone forward. Perhaps I would imagine learned his lesson. There's going to be a full pension payment made. What you're talking about, Jeff, is an idea that is presented by the Civic Committee of the Commercial Club of Chicago. So we're really talking about some of the civically engaged CEOs, the big shots when it comes to big money and business in the state of Illinois and in the city of Chicago. And it's interesting because this is an organization that had been pushed back very hard against the graduated income tax constitutional amendment question. Now, however, they are coming forward and with a couple of ideas. Part of it is revenue reductions. They're just looking at, say, percentage decreases across all agencies. That is something that, again, I don't expect to be embraced, because you did see a lot of agencies that were hollowed out during the budget fights of the Rauner years. And again, when you have a revenue increase, you're not apt to see organizations and agencies, oh, yeah, we'll take a little bit of a trim. The other main component of this idea is adding an income tax surcharge, 0.5%. But they would limit the time span that it would be on. So it would be for the next 10 years. And then it would be limited as well. Couldn't go to all these programs that we've just been talking about. Instead, it would be solely dedicated to pensions. So that is an idea. It does come from a prominent organization made of prominent individuals. Does that mean it's going to gain any traction? I don't expect so. As I noted, this is a group that fought against the graduated income tax proposal. So really no love lost there between Pritzker. This is not his natural constituencies, and he's not going to want to. There's been no indication whatsoever that he is amenable to an income tax increase, particularly at this point in time, while inflation, notions of a recession are still very much on voters' minds. So I think this is going to be a report that gains some attention, because pensions do continue to be an albatross that cannot be ignored, except for they often are. This will be a report that gets a little bit of attention and then is stuffed away on a bookshelf somewhere.
And there's a good track record of ignoring it on both sides of the political aisle, going back at least 30 years, as we know. Some other new legislation that may be pending or may be out there: the child tax credit. There's an idea of potentially coming up with a plan that's kind of mirrors the federal plan. What are proponents of this hoping to achieve, and do we even think that this is something that may even come to fruition during this session?
This is one of those pieces of legislation that is ostensibly very popular, and it could gain some traction, especially with Democratic supermajorities. But again, this is one of those programs, like I mentioned a few moments ago, that would cost anywhere between $700–800 million every year. And it's one of those permanent programs that Illinois lawmakers probably would be wise to take a look at and see if they can afford for a long period of time once revenues start to go back down. So this particular proposal would be an additional payment to parents, and it's refundable. So that means if the credit's more than what you owe, the extra would come back to you. And this would apply to individuals, single people who earn below $50,000, I think, and married couples with incomes below $75,000. They would be eligible for a $700 per child tax credit. And if you make more than that, you still could get some under this proposal. So if you earn more than that, the amount of the credit would go down by roughly I think it's $24 for each $1,000 of additional income. So it's really interesting how people who are proposing this and who are in favor of this are trying to frame it, because as you see with other discussions about whether it's economic stimulus or payments or legislation, really, that's going to help the lower or middle class, a lot of people are asking, well, how are we going to pay for that $700 to $800 million every year? It's thought of as a price tag. It's thought of as something that we have to pay for. Whereas people like State Senator Robert Peters, who was at the news conference this week introducing this piece of legislation, he got pretty hot about this. He wants people to think of this not necessarily as a thing that we have to pay for, but it's an investment. It's an investment in not only people, lower and middle income people, but also the economy. He points out, how many times have we seen economic stimulus payments, for example, or child tax credits that exist already being used immediately to pay for things like diapers and food and things like that. And he thinks, that's an investment. And it's kind of interesting that his district covers Soldier Field. And it's interesting that he chose to juxtapose the current situation with the Bears trying to move out of Chicago into Arlington Heights as, hey, we're talking about property tax relief for big businesses like the Chicago Bears as an investment, but why can't we talk about child tax credits as an investment? So it'll be really interesting to see how both sides of this equation try to frame this and try to push this forward, because I do think that this is one of those things that this year, especially with how many Democrats there are and how flush state finances seem to be, they're going to try to push.
Hey, both of you, in the couple of minutes or so that we have left, as you gaze out into your legislative crystal ball, what are you looking for? What are you looking at in the next couple of weeks as we get really into the heart of the legislative session?
Yeah, so I think we're going to be initially hear what the governor says, get that reaction to it, see what all of these organizations, because there is so much. I think Alice described it aptly, and that's where it gets to really tough conversations, and where you talk about budgets as a priorities. And also realities. There are a lot of programs that if you invest in, say, early childhood early on, pay dividends down the line, but then the budget is the here and now, as are, elections and politicians' priorities. So let's not forget that in the here and now. We're going to be looking to see that. There's been a whole lot of really interesting legislation that's been introduced, some attention, be it from psychedelics. There's another give a credit to families to purchase diapers. There's a lot of attention toward, I think, the needs of families, particularly those that are struggling now, and that as you see stimulus money dry up. Further, we're going to have to watch carefully what goes forward with the federal government. And as you are seeing potential cuts from the feds as they look to deal with the debt ceiling, Medicaid, for example, is on the table. And what cost would that bear to Illinois? Certainly an important program that the state has invested in, and you would see the supermajority of Democrats believing in as one of those pay now, invest, and save money in the long term, as well as investing in general in families and residents and being good for the state of Illinois. So those are some key things that we'll be watching. Also, of course, the state of the state. The Republicans are in fewer numbers, and yet they have definitely gone more conservative. So we will be watching to see, is there any sort of that pushback? What is the Eastern Bloc, the Freedom Caucus? What are these groups going to try and do to gain attention as they are in the super minority? And how I will be watching all session long how the new Republican leadership deals with all of this.
All right, Amanda, thank you. Alex?
I think you hit on a really interesting point, Amanda. It's going to be really interesting to see how Leader McCombie deals with, we're calling them the Eastern Bloc, we're calling them the Freedom Caucus. Well, really, it's just a faction of very conservative Republicans. But you saw this kind of play out already when the House voted on the rules of the chamber not too long ago. Tony McCombie put a couple of votes on that. She voted for it, even though a large majority of her caucus didn't. So it's going to be really interesting to see how that continues? Is she going to be the one who continues to go across the aisle and say, Speaker, I'm going to put some votes on this and I don't like it, but I'm going to work with you? And is she going to, and how is she going to deal with the Representative Calkins and the Nienbergs and the people in the Freedom Caucus?
Yeah. Alex, I'm going to have to stop you there. Alex and Amanda, thank you so much. Alex Eggman, IPR WBEZ, Amanda Vinicky, WTTW Chicago Tonight. Thank you for joining us. For Jennifer Fuller, I'm Jeff Williams. Thank you for watching and joining us for Capitol View.